No, you told me that's fine, but I'm not going to send you that. So from July, I'm told you 16 to 17.
Hey Dorothy, how are you? Where's Phil? Yeah, baking.
Wow, I saw that look too. It's like, why are you there? Yeah. Wow. We're still outside. Come on. There's one place more.
Oh, you got it. That's 5 minutes after she's ready.
Might be the perfect.
Call the meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. Rise to the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First up, there a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Agenda's approved. Next, we will open up to community comments. Does anyone in the room have comments? Hearing none. Anyone watching at home, if you would like to comment, please raise your hand and we will bring you into the webinar. Please state your name and the town in which you reside.
I see one community member who's raising their hand, so I'll allow them. Karen, could you please state your name and where you are from?
Yes, Karen Lovejoy from Mendon, Mass. I'm just wondering if we'll be able to ask questions after the meeting.
Yeah, so after our discussion, after the committee discusses the recertification of the budget, I will open it back up for to ask questions and comment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions before we move on? Okay, so we will move on to new business. So we're going to discuss the implications of the failed override in Mendon and cuts that will need to be made as a result of that.
Okay, great. I just have a few slides that I'd like to share with everybody. I will also share it with people who are at home. Let me just open this up. And for all of us, I think we can see it on the monitor. That's coming through on the Zoom. Okay. So we know what happened 6 days ago, that the Proposition 2.5 override for the amount of $803,338 failed at the ballot by 111 votes in the town of Mendon. So as a result, and I think just stating something very explicitly, right now the regional school district does not have a operational budget for next school year for FY22 that's been approved by both communities. And as we said before, kind of ad nauseum, particularly during the last 3 or 4 meetings, that loss of $803,000 from the fail override is actually markedly more. And the actual loss in funding to our district is more than 2.1 million. To be specific, it's 2,160,952, because the rules of the road of a regional school district is you always have to have proportional shares of contributions from each community. So based upon the minimum local contribution, and we discussed many times before that for this coming fiscal year, Upton's was markedly more than Mendon's. When you take that into account, in addition to our enrollment, we lose also Upton's proportional share to that 803, and it's nearly 1.4 million. So hence, I would say that this is clearly a crisis, because 2.1 million is a significant amount of money, and I will speak in very specific terms about what that means. Again, we do have a situation where there is not approval from both communities. However, realize Upton chose a different course of action than the town of Mendon as far as funding it, and it was not put to an override vote. So Upton's proportional share has been approved, and it was approved at the annual town meeting on May 8th. So really, I think to kind of set the table for your discussion as a school committee, it really comes down to simply 3 actions that you can take as a regional school committee, because there is a split decision between the 2 communities. 1, you could choose to do absolutely nothing and accept the smaller budget with the over $2.1 million in cuts. Realize this would equate to an operational budget of about $37.8 million, which represents less than a 1% increase, 0.87% increase. That clearly would not meet many of our demands. A lot of the cost drivers that we've discussed as a committee that are kind of beyond our control. As superintendent of the school district, I would not recommend that you do that. You also have the option to stay status quo and recertify the same exact amount that you recertified during the budget hearing on March 15th. And then in turn, and this is in line with state law, reissue the assessments to Mendon and Upton. Again, Upton has already met the challenge. It would be in the decision-making of the Board of Selectmen of Mendon to what to do with that. Or you can recertify the budget at a lesser amount than you did on March 15th, and again, reissue the assessment to both of our communities. Again, as we've discussed, in the certification process, you can stay the same or you can go down, you can never go up. Okay, again, state law. So in my humble opinion, number 2 and number 3 would be the 2 courses of action which you could take this evening. I'd like to talk a little bit about number 3 and the lesser amount based upon some of the dialogue that has occurred specifically at the budget subcommittee level and speaking with town officials from both towns and particularly Mendon. One of the things that you could choose to do that was discussed is to take the positions that we talked about, and again, we're talking about 7 FTEs that were approved in your initial certification. And these are positions, again, 2 of them represent restoration of positions that were cut in 2019, specifically the library media specialist here at Nipmuc, and also a technology support technician district-wide, again, also cut in 2019. And the other positions, again, coming out of the pandemic, specifically 2 school adjustment counselors at the middle school and the high school, an instructional intervention coach at our 2 elementary schools, those 2 positions, and then concerns about class sizes that are creeping up in the 26, 27 range in Upton would be an addition of a 4th grade teacher position at Memorial. So as we discussed, those 7 positions represent $450,000 that could be removed from the budget request. Additionally, we talked about some other items that could be cut, specifically investments, mostly in NIPMUC athletics, 25,000 of, I'm sorry, 30,000 of that 35,000 to make up for the lost gate receipts as a result of just not having spectators and parents and so on. We did find out that we will only have a net increase of 1 student at Norfolk Aggie rather than the 3 that were budgeted. Keep in mind that it's roughly $25,000 in tuition that the district must subsume for each of the students that go there. And then reduction of textbook and tech line items, the largest of which, and again, I think I'm being optimistic, but I think I'm being intelligent in my optimism of cutting out the district expense for Zoom. Because keep in mind, it was a significant expense to have Zoom licensing for every single staff member and every single student. However, keep in mind, to have a level service budget, you would have to add back certain things that were cut, specifically the aid that we have here in the Library Media Center, the head teachers and curriculum associate positions, which are stipend positions, which we envision that our instructional intervention coaches would take place. So that adds back $58,491. So the reduction to get strictly to level services would be taking $511,509. So keep in mind that the strictly level services budget would equate to, you see the amount of approximately 11.2 million to Mendon and 13.8 million to Upton. So as a result, the increase to Mendon, which was again an increase of about $803,000, because the full amount of the increase was put to an override, would drop down to an increase of about $578,000, and the increase to Upton would drop down by a little bit more than $200,000 to approximately $1.2 million. So to kind of go back to the first point of what I am not advising to, if this committee were to do absolutely nothing. Again, I can't go back to the district needing to make $2.1 million in cuts. So keep in mind, after removing what I just described there, that $511,509 down to level services, the district would still have to implement over $1.6 million in cuts. Now, as we know, and we've discussed many times, that the overwhelming majority of our costs are in personnel, specifically salaries and benefits. We could look at approximately $100,000 in line item cuts in various line items such as professional development, that is drastically cutting that back. There would be no conferences or anything like that. Cutting some of our instructional supplies and textbooks, some minor student activities, but again, there is not a lot of money in those individual line items. So the reality of the situation is you would have to be looking at approximately $1.5 million in staffing cuts. So myself and the principals have kind of taken a look at this again in a very, very preliminary fashion. But as I said before, going up to this override, we would be looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 30 to 35 cuts being executed. Our initial estimates would be that we'd be looking at about 24 layoff notices for both professional and support staff across the district, and a non-replacement of about 7.5 FTEs. So that would be folks that are retiring or folks that might be leaving the district for different reasons. So in total, about 31.5 less FTEs next year going into this year. So as we've unfortunately discussed in the past during other budget crunches, by state law, reduction in force or RIF notices must go out by state law by a week from tomorrow, June 1st. So therefore, with this uncertainty and lack of resolution, it pains me that all of our layoff notices must go out to staff this week. So in looking at, again, to go back to that point of 31.5 FTEs, what would that mean in programmatic service reductions? And again, over the last two meetings, I've discussed this, but in looking at the positions that would be eliminated, this is what it comes down to. First and foremost, we would reduce the 2 strands of Spanish immersion down to 1. And specifically, and I know we've talked about at the committee level that we do have very healthy numbers as far as Spanish immersion for the first time in years at Mendon at Clough Elementary School. However, we have a situation where we're losing by attrition naturally some of our SI staff. So as a result, we would only run 1 section of Spanish immersion just strictly at Memorial Elementary School. I think with some of the layoffs, you would see a reduction in special education, intervention, in literacy supports and services for our youngest learners. I think through the bumping process and also the layoff process, I think you would see class sizes, because in some cases you would be going down from 4 sections down to 3 sections. Your class sizes bumping up in that range of 27 to 31 in select grades. And then also reduction of electives. So opportunities that our kids have with regard to things like technology, music, or the arts would also be curtailed. At the middle school, across the board, grades 5, 6, 7, and 8, you would see your class sizes be somewhere in that 27 to 30 range. It typically is smaller at grade 5, where it's usually in the ballpark of around 22. That would creep up to 27. Our larger at 25 at grade 8 definitely would be in the 30 range. You would also see a very drastic reduction of electives, and specifically the middle school is the first opportunity for really to grow our band and chorus programs. You would also see a reduction of opportunities in art and also world languages. We've talked a lot, and in that initial request around the school adjustment counselor, we really talked a lot about a key responsibility to build up the bridge program here at Nipmuc and also at the middle school. I think you would see regression in that direction as far as the reduction of services for our kids who really need those biggest the most intensive services, particularly the linkage between mental health services, but also the academic interventions and making sure that there's the liaison between the academic and the counseling. Here at the high school, again, it varies upon the course, but I think we can say with a high degree of confidence that we would see class sizes over 30 in all content areas. Again, reduction of elective opportunities for all students. And I said that across all three levels for the simple reason that in making really, really difficult decisions, you make the decision to really keep the academic core intact. The core academics, which our kids need, not that art, not that music, not that world languages, business, and so on, are extremely important. We're fully cognizant of that, but this is a situation about making difficult decisions. I think we would also find less support and resources for the AP program. When you're in the process of making really difficult decisions about staffing, you have other line items, things like the Massachusetts Insight program, which we've been a member for at least, I want to say at least pushing 10 years now. That is about a $17,000, $18,000 investment. Unfortunately, we would end our affiliation with that. We'd also look at some of our stipend positions that support instructional leadership across the content areas, cuts to those areas. And then as we discussed before, we would kind of go back to the future with regard to our athletics program, and a significant, almost all of the sports program would be self-funded through user fees, so therefore your user fees would jump up into the ballpark of $400 to $500. So that's obviously why I would not recommend doing nothing, knowing that we are going to have to make these cuts. But I think the reality of the current situation needs to be underscored, and it's very unfortunate that we're in this situation. I think if there's one word that describes it right now, it is uncertainty, because again, we do not have a fixed budget for next year. Unfortunately, as I noted before, layoff notices will have to, by state law, go out this week. And a real shame is we will be losing funding if this situation is not resolved prior to June 17th, which is our last day of school. Anyone who's received a layoff notice is eligible to start receiving unemployment benefits. So after June 17th, a portion of our budget will have to go into paying our share, which is roughly 35% of unemployment benefits. And I want to underscore this, and unfortunately, this is very much akin to the situation that we were in 2015 with the initial failed Mendon override. But I want to underscore that for our staff that is laid off, it is very much a buyer's market right now, okay? I cannot mention districts that are laying off teachers. To the contrary, knowing that American Recovery Act is present in all of the communities across the Commonwealth, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there's probably more districts that are looking to hire teachers and looking to hire staff, particularly in looking in intervention areas and looking in social emotional learning and mental health. So again, I don't have the adjectives to discuss my emotions right now, but I am fairly certain that of our staff that we lay off, we will lose talent. It happened, unfortunately, in 2015, and I see it happening now. So that just kind of sets the table, and I wanted to kind of give you an overview of where we are post-election.
Can we list out some of the different, how things may play out if we say recertify at the same amount versus recertifying at a lesser amount in terms of how that would be, how the towns might choose to fund that, what that might look like going forward?
So I think it really comes down to, the town of Mendon will have to make a decision how it could be funded. The thing that's a little bit different this year is just the simple fact that from FY21 to FY22, we were completely level funded by the town of Mendon. The full amount of the additional was put to an override, and right now that override is unsuccessful. So I think the question is, how could or would the town of Mendon fund it, or would it go strictly to a second override vote? I can tell you, and maybe Jay could fill these numbers in. I don't know off the top of my head how much an override of 803,000 versus 577,000 would mean to the average homeowner in the town of Mendon. My gut tells me it probably isn't a demonstrable amount.
I'll tell you in 1 second if you give me a chance here. All right, so the 803,338, the average house, the tax increase is about 335 plus the CPA surcharge, so it gets up to about $345. If it was 577,927, it would be what's the amount? 577.
Do you need that, Jay?
Yeah, for some reason it's not letting me type into my sheet right now. I don't know why. So until I reopen this, I can tell you,
It's 577,927,
I
Jay.
have to close and open the spreadsheet to make it
Okay.
what I want to do. So give me a second.
I don't think it's a demonstrably enormous amount. Maybe in the ballpark of about $50, $75.
Yeah, my spreadsheet's not working right now, so I can't give you that answer.
Next time, try a Mac, Jay.
Yeah, that's it. So it's an Excel thing. So I mean, you're talking $200,000. So I'd say you're probably dropping it down by $100 a year, maybe 125, something like that.
I'd be curious to hear from the rest of the committee in terms of what you're hearing from people, because I know the people that I speak with in Upton, are very frustrated because Upton voted, to support this overwhelmingly at town meeting, to fund the full budget request. There were a lot of people there who spoke very passionately about the need to support the schools and the students. So, and that's certainly what I hear when I speak with people in person individually. So I'm just curious what people are hearing from other people in both towns.
Vicki, just so you know, I got it to work. It's about 241. It's about 247 is what it would drop down to. So basically about $100 a year.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jay.
So I'll go first. Among the people that I contact, everyone is shocked that the override didn't pass. Now maybe that's just that I'm in the wrong circles, or it may be that there's a lot of people that are sort of hiding the truth from me. I don't know. It's otherwise I don't have a good feeling for why. The way I interpret it is not enough people showed up to the polls. I think there might have been a little bit of the feeling of abstinence there, where they're not too comfortable about the information, the conflicting information they're seeing. They're not sure where they smell something rotten and they're not sure where it is, and so they decide to just leave the whole thing alone. I'm speculating that might be a problem. I really don't know. But that's kind of the feeling I get.
You were gonna.
I, from Upton's side, I have the same thing as you. Like, people were kind of frustrated, a lot of people were frustrated, so.
Can I ask a question? So we kind of went through a little bit of adjustments we could make. I don't know whether or not we've got greater clarity on ESSER funding, or we've got greater clarity on certain costs that are out there that might have been reduced through negotiations. Because the number we put out there before is 2.5 months old, essentially. So do we have any additional information? I mean, I'm not expecting it to be millions of dollars, but I'm just asking, do we have any clarity? Have we thought about how we can use that funding or not, or?
Unfortunately, with regard to ESSER 3 funds, for us as a school district, we were supposed to receive guidance from DESE on specifically how those funds were a week ago today, and we still have not received it. To my knowledge, to be fair to our 2 towns, they also have not received guidance either. And again, the dollar amount is about 1.8 million for the town of Mendon and 2.4 million for the town of Upton.
And then our ESSER funding is what?
483,000.
465, it got lower.
465.
Look at that, the magic of the federal government.
Why did it get lowered?
They didn't give us a reason for that one. I just got a spreadsheet today that said our allocation was about 465 and some change. Can I talk my 2 cents here? I mean, the discussion here is how would Mendon fund additional money? I don't know if any of the members of the select board of Mendon or the FinCom are attending this meeting, but maybe we should get some input from them as to what they think.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So is there any, we're going, right now this discussion is going forward with the assumption that we're going with an override to Mendon for an amount. Is it, do we have to bring that entire amount to an override, given that Mendon hasn't given us any money this year above what they normally, or above what they gave us last year?
Is anyone from the Mendon, FinCom, or Board of Selectmen?
Can I just,
Yeah.
from just my experience on the finance committee, your obligation is to come up with a number and tell the municipality what that number is. It's up to the municipality to decide how they fund it. It's not up to the district to tell the town how they think they should fund it. Okay? Simple as that. It's not rocket science, folks.
Understood. I mean, from my perspective, we've come up with that number. We spent.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the base of the question. I mean, we had this conversation 2 months ago.
Mhm.
It's a question, it's a simple, parenting game. We talked about is the number. We tried to adjust it down, but, we understood that the needs that we have and the time and the pandemic and the pieces that are there. And, the support for continuing, to bring our school and operate our school in the way the parents want it will require this budget.
Mark Reel, who's the chair of the Mendon Board of Selectmen, raised his hand. So Mark has been promoted to panelist. Mark?
Hey everyone, can you hear me? I am in the car. Are you able to hear me?
Perfectly fine, Mark.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a background, I think, on why we are where we are today in terms of Mendon's budget. And it really comes down to, and the reasons why we didn't give more than we did last year, and we put the whole amount in the override because frankly, with what we had to work with, we didn't have the funds to to basically give what we normally had given in the past, which was half a new growth. We needed those funds to give our budget what we needed to even provide level service. So we saw the ask that was coming from the school committee, and we decided that the path forward would be to include the entire amount on an override to be able to fund the school system. So that's kind of where we are. And to be honest, I don't see the next step being us coming up with the money. It's likely that, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself at this point, but it's likely that any amount coming from a recertified budget will be going to another override vote.
Great, thank you.
I think Mike Maroli has his hand up as well. I'm going to promote Mike to panelist. Mike, are you there?
Screen disappeared for a second. Now I think I'm back.
Loud and clear.
Okay. So what Mark just said, based on my knowledge, the only way that we would be able to come up with the funds would be either the override or any of these American Recovery Act funds. But again, the problem with that is, number one, it's that's a one-time issue, and we also don't know, as you said, Joe, what the parameters are, if we could even use it. I think the only option at this point is to go back to the townspeople again and ask them for another bite at the apple, whether you recertify it at the lower number or at the original number. I would say that you have there's a better chance of passing the override at the lower number, although I'm not sure how good that is, because I think people on both sides will dig in their heels. It's the reality of the situation. And I know I will tell you that I had on election day, I had a tremendous amount of people stop on both sides. But one comment, and I'm just passing this along, is the question is, why is it always teachers and people who deal directly with the students and not administration? And that is a question that I get universally. And I'm sure there's an answer for that, but I wanted to pass that along to the committee.
I would be more than happy to answer that question, Mike, for you and anybody who answers that question. Because as a regional school district, we are an administrative team of 11 individuals. We are incredibly lean. And in fact, I can honestly say that there's a larger administrative team down the road at BVT than there is here in Mendon-Upton. People, unfortunately, have their own ideas. They like to run with certain tropes that they hear about something like having an assistant superintendent or having co-principals. But the reality of the situation is, if you are to take a look at what the administration represents with regard to personnel costs relative to all of our neighboring districts, it's remarkably low.
I think to add something to that, just to put the data from the state site out there. I mean, today, just overall from an in-district per pupil expenditure, we rank at 209 out of 326, okay? So if you think about that, we're probably we're the lower middle third in that regard. In terms of admin or central office costs, we rank 279th out of 326. So we basically rank in the lower 10% of the state, okay? And then instructional leadership, which is school and department leaderships, principals, sometimes I hear the concept of co-principals, we rank 236 out of 326. So I think when you look at those numbers, you can see that our spending and our budgetary component for what we're asking in those areas is actually well in line or actually below many other areas, especially when you think about our recent ranking from US News and World Report at 65 out of 326 Mass high schools. So that's kind of the thing I keep bringing back to when you look at the balance out of these pieces about what we're spending, either in a per student, per pupil area in comparison to our peers out there across the state.
Right, but there are several regional comparisons about pay scales and what area of the state that you live in. We could argue about it all day long, but my counterpart in Upton is right. At the end of the day, you folks certify the budget, and the municipality has to decide how to fund it. Upton had more options this time than we did. Our option is either to is only to go to the override, to ask for an increase in the ceiling of what we can ask people to pay, and that's what we did. And again, that option has not changed. That is unfortunately where we're at. So it's actually the voters that show up at town meeting and the voters that show up at the polls. That's what it comes down to.
So, and if I could also add one more thing, because it's not good to ignore a question. If we bring up that administration is our problem, then let's answer it fully. With all due respect, when we hire administrators, when we build the administrative team, we build them. Our strategy has been to hire relatively few of them, but highly experienced and highly effective. That's where we get all of our bids and all of the funds that we get on grants. That's where we get all those things. That's where we get the ability to excel in our technology deployment across the school district. That's where we get the agility that we had during the COVID crisis. This is where we are mostly effective, is having a very competent administration staff. So I want to dispel this rumor that we've got some bloating in the school somewhere, some fat that needs to be carved out. We are down to the bone here, and we're trying to provide services at a very effective level with a minimum budget. It is very difficult to get people to understand that when you've got the amount of disinformation out there that we had in this past election.
So I guess the question comes back to but are these services and structures the services and structures? Because ultimately we're talking about student performance here. So I guess another question I have, if we make any of these respective cuts that we're talking about, how does that impact student performance? I don't see it as improving student performance. I don't even see it as being able to maintain student performance.
Well, also, if we're talking about cutting services, particularly in the special education area, you're going to have families who are going to be looking for out-of-district services. So if we can no longer meet the needs of the students, we're going to have to find a placement that does, and that's an additional cost to the district.
Yeah. I get worried that we're going to go back to what happened back in, 2011, 2010, where the general flood kind of went across the street. And I think both towns saw substantial increases to their BBT assessments or their Norfolk Aggie assessments. And to your point, I would agree with you, because I think that there are, we start cutting more and more on the, special ed. And I think I am a big proponent from the standpoint of, we have to continue to evolve in the services we provide, but at the same point in time, cutting the funding or cutting those funds in those areas in the end is actually more detrimental to the students that are outside of special education versus the ones that are in, because many of those costs are state mandated or we have very little control over. Right. So
I would also like to say that the additional positions that we had recommended for passing by the towns, that is not only part of our strategic plan that has been in place since 2017, but it's also in direct response to the number of support calls we're getting from families and parents that we are required to respond to by the state, and that we are probably not doing an adequate job enough about this today. So I would say that if we don't put those things in place, we're actually stepping backwards twice. So this is not something that is a brand new program of wasteful spending by the school. This is something that is actually called for, and we need to respond to the community's needs right now. It's of imperative importance that we do that. That's the reason why we put it on the budget. It wasn't because we had this idea that we were going to be spendthrift. It was actually a needed position, set of needed positions.
So, I don't know, the sense of where they're at, certainly, my inclination at this point is to recertify at the same amount. I mean, we've talked about this for months, and this is the budget that's appropriate and necessary to best support the needs of our students. So I don't see lowering this budget request.
I'm in agreement. I think it needs to be recertified at the same amount.
I would agree.
Yeah, I'd agree as well. I think, the numbers that Phil rattled off there, right, just doing some quick math, is you've got a school that's in the top 80th percentile of performance in a budget that's in the bottom 30th percentile, right? So that has shown that the school district has delivered a lot of efficiency to get that broad range of separation. I think the asks of the 7 FTEs are relatively minimal. A lot of them around social emotional, which it's a challenge right now, unfortunately, for the kids, the pandemic, and just what we've seen in neighboring towns and what kids have gone through. That this is a very small ask in the grand scheme of things.
Come back and say it again, where I think the value that our towns and communities get from this school is huge.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I say the value that Mendon is getting from this arrangement, the value that Mendon's getting from this override request is immense compared to the expense of Upton. It's imperative that we do something about this as our town needs it.
So do we need to hear from anybody else in the public? Do we need
Yeah.
to, before we vote?
Yes.
My apologies. There are 2 hands raised. One is for Karen, who I think we had spoken earlier. She's had her hand raised for quite a while. So I will allow her to talk.
Yes, please.
Yes,
Perfect. So Karen, you are all set to talk. Can you hear us?
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, but first of all, just an observation. Mr. Marujak said that they had 11 administration. You actually have 15. So that's one thing right there. Not 11, 15. And my next question is, why do we need 14 administrative assistants? And what is the difference between an assistant superintendent, an assistant principal, an associate principal? I need to know what the difference is here, because you could save a lot of money right here. Unfortunately, you take it out on the kids, and that's not right. And you take it out on the teachers, and that's not right.
Reporting is not accurate. We do not have 15 administrators.
I'm reading the town report.
Sure. With regard to your question, I believe, was what the difference was between assistant principal and principal.
An associate principal.
We do not have any. We do
There you
not
go.
have any position by the title of associate principal. We have one assistant principal in the district, and that is at Misco Hill Middle School.
And you have 2 principals at NITMA. Why?
Because we have 2 very, very strong administrators. As of 4 years ago and prior, we had a principal and an assistant principal, and one was promoted to co-principal, and essentially the net difference in making that promotion to co-principal was an increase of $7,000. and we have 2 individuals who serve as co-principals, but they are both doing both principal and assistant principal duties. So realize when that change was executed in 2016, there was no net increase in administrators. It was just a change of title.
Exactly.
So there is a principal, there's an assistant superintendent, there's a assistant principal, an associate principal,
No associate principal.
Where's
but
the,
it's on right here on the, it's right here on 219, 220. Associate principal, $127,000. I'm
Where-
reading the book,
where?
Where are you reading that?
the annual town report, 2019, 2020. I'm just trying to figure out why all these people are working under certain names, and you can cut. Don't take it from the kids. Don't take it from the teachers. I love the teachers. But you really need to look at your administration costs.
So you are looking at a report that unfortunately has a antiquated title. It's Mary Ann Moran, and it says associate principal. Mary Ann Moran is the co-principal along with Mr. Clements.
So you have 2 co-principals
That's correct.
for
They're
what school?
The only administration that
For what
exists
school?
at Nipmuc Regional High School.
Why do you need 2 principals and 2 co-principals and a superintendent in one school?
Only 2 administrators. There are 2 co-principals at the school. There's not co-principals and associate principals and assistant principals. There are 2 co-principals at the high school.
And who are they?
They are John Clements and Mary Ann Moran.
Where's Jennifer Mannion come in? She's a principal. Oh, she's Misco. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So I'm a little, I mean, it sounds like you're reading an older report.
I was given this report when we had the outdoor town meeting.
Oh,
This is in the report. Yes, it is.
Okay. There's one principal at Clough. There's one principal at Memorial. There's a principal and assistant principal at Misco and 2 co-principals at NIP. That's the current principal. There is an superintendent and an assistant superintendent that are in the central office.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the pieces that you're talking about. When you talk about also administration, just so we're clear, there's 2 components. There is what I talked about was school leadership, which is where the principals fall. And then there is the central office where the superintendents fall.
Mm-hmm.
Where those costs are. And that's where those rankings and the pieces that are there. When you say that we have bloated administration. or
You
we have
do.
Administration, I beg to differ with you. You have your opinion and perspective, but I beg to differ with you.
Okay, answer me this. If you got the last override, and you did, why did you cut the library, elementary head, teachers, and the certified assistant? If you got all that money, why did you cut them?
Which override are you talking about?
Oh, last year?
When you say we got all that money, what money are you speaking of?
Whatever you needed, you got. It passed. That's it. It passed.
So last year, the original ask was basically equal to what we're asking for here. Okay? Through
Correct.
the pandemic, and because the pandemic hit, we found ourselves in a situation where those numbers were reduced drastically. And in fact, the override was taken off the table in Upton, and it was only at, I don't remember exactly the logic why Mendon put a smaller override on. It was like $200,000.
Correct. 271,000.
Okay, so if you actually were to add that 200,000 to the 800,000 of this year, you would actually get this pretty close to the same number we asked for last year. So
No,
we-
I don't want to add that. What I'm trying to say is if you got your override last year, why did you cut positions?
We reduced our override dramatically last year because of COVID. That's
Because of
why.
COVID.
By the way, the positions were cut in prior years to meet budget requirements from the towns.
I mean, God, you have like 12 janitors that didn't have to come in because the school wasn't open. I don't get this.
Do you have another question?
Who are you?
She happens to be the chairman of the school committee.
Okay, chairman. And her name is?
Vicki Ludwigson.
I would actually recommend for you to go back and listen to the recordings that are online of the budget review meetings back in March of this year, as well as March in last year, as well as March in the previous year before, so that you can see the constant transparency and messaging that we've had about this budget and this coming. Because these things that you're talking about are not new. They're not confusing, but they are all there. And I understand that, I understand what your questions and your pieces are there, but I would ask that you go back and take a look at that. And then we're happy to sit down with you and answer any and all questions.
I've already done that. Thank you. I'm all set.
All right, talking is disabled. So we have a raised hand from Coleman. All right. So Coleman, you are permitted to talk. You can state your name and your town of residence.
Yes, hi, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Coleman D, town of Mendon. First, I guess I'd like to thank you all for coming together and then sharing some of this information for the town. I think it definitely helps. But I guess I would like to just share the prior caller's frustration. There was a gentleman who just talked about some of the expenses that have been raised over the last few years, rather distinctively as well. In fact, I think he was using exact numbers and what have you. And I guess I'd like to say that that's part of the problem. In that we're getting 1 year's worth of information, when in fact, I think the school department has multiple years. And they knew, if you will, 5 years ago that we were going to be paying much more of the percentage of the educational cost over this 5-year period. And that information was not made clear, I think, to any of the towns. And I really think that that is really the frustration. And I think if that information came out and was shared, as well as the hard work that the school committee does, the quality of staffing that we have, the high quality of 80% of the school systems, call it the accreditation, if you will, that we have. I mean, I think we all know, how good the school system is. We do. What we don't know, perhaps, is the fact that we may only be meeting 30% of the budget. That would be very helpful, but we don't have that information, and we don't have multiple year budgeting. So I guess I'd like to say that, I think the town will support and hopefully will support this increase. But I'd like to see very much more information and in a multi-year form, because I truly believe you actually have this information. So I'd like to just leave it at that.
Hi, Coleman. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, so I hear your frustration, but I do have to say that, 6 years ago in 2015, when we presented the override, it was made very clear that this override, the money from that override would carry us through for about the next 5 years because of reduced funding from the state each year. So last year, basically 5 years later, we came back knowing that we would need an override. As we discussed earlier, we ended up recertifying our original budget at a lower amount because of the pandemic. And so now, essentially 1 year later, we've come back with pretty close to the exact same amount that we originally certified last year. So, and we were very clear last year that we were essentially just deferring that override for 1 year. So, that information is out there, in terms of, long-term planning. I don't know if you want to add something.
No.
I would just also say, seeing that myself and Jay are responsible for the budget documents, if you go, Coleman, to the MURSD website, you can find every single budget, I believe, going back till FY 2016. And if you go through all of our budget documents, even the initial ones, the ones that are presented, we always present our numbers in 5 fiscal years. So we go back 5 fiscal years, and then all the way up to current year, and then the proposed year. So.
May I also bring up something? Yeah. Coleman, thank you very much for your questions. I value your questions at town meetings. I very much do. So thank you very much. And it does illustrate a little bit of the problem that we're having as a school committee. The communication to the public is very difficult. I'll just give you some of the steps we took to make sure that the budgeting has been communicated over the past 5 years. Since the override, which was very well communicated because of a contentious budget passing scenario, similar to the one we're going through now, since that time, we've gone through a number of budget meetings each year to make sure, and they're all open meetings, to make sure everybody understands the status of the reduction in funds from the state. We also, every single one of those years, if I'm not mistaken, we had a minimum local contribution that went up. This year's a difference for that, but it went up, and it was a struggle for each one of the towns to comply with that. We were all aware of that. We communicated that many times in the town meetings, not the town meetings, the school committee meetings. And also in the budget year of 2020, budget year, during 2019, we were very aware that we needed to pass an override. We were aware probably for 5 years that that was going to be the year we needed to pass the override. We'd actually been readjusting our budgets so that we wouldn't have a major override until the 5th year. So we planned, Dr. Maruschek very meticulously planned out budget meetings, a systemic review of our entire budget expenditures. Every single budget item was gone through: special education, transportation, sports. We went through it in excruciating detail at each one of those public meetings at our school district buildings. How many people showed up from the public? Not many. Not many. A gentleman over here, the select committee in Upton, was at every single one of those meetings. Paul Flaherty. I very much appreciate that fact. Finance committee, yes, sorry.
Just promoted.
So the confusing aspect of this, Coleman, is how do we communicate the details of something that is very, very complex, right? And it has a crucial impact to our children in it, but no one wants to pay attention.
Right.
And I'm sorry, that is a very frustrating thing for us, and I'm glad you brought up that question. Thank you.
Can I, if I can just comment, I look here and there are, 32 participants on the call besides the ones in the room and the panel members. And I think you would all agree that the participation this year far exceeds anything we've seen in the past. And the reason is they can actually tune in remotely.
Right.
And, Coleman, just to point out, the information that you indicate you didn't have access to has been continually presented every year. And I have been involved at least with the FinCom in Mendon for a decade. And before that, I was aware that the percentage that the municipalities, the towns were required to contribute to the regional school district continued to increase incrementally year over year.
Did we lose Mike?
No, I just think he went dark.
And we knew this was coming. The school, did I lose you or?
Oh, you just came back, Mike.
Okay. What I was saying is that the school committee predicted all of this, communicated it. The issue is that people, I don't think it's a matter that they weren't paying attention, but they just couldn't easily get to the meeting. And I think we've struck on an important point that whatever happens as we move out of this pandemic, this opportunity for people to tune in this way needs to continue. Because people tend to pay attention, and the easier it is for them to get the information, the more of it gets out there. You know, one thing that we did discuss, you know, at this, we had a candidates forum a little over a week ago, you know, before our election, and I commented that, you know, that I referenced an article from the town crier that indicated that there was predicted to be, you know, 3 overrides in a row last year, this year, and next year. And that's inaccurate, but that's what I read and that's what I talked about. And then that was apparently a piece of misinformation that was out there. And again, it's important that people have the facts. But again, you know, it isn't that the school committee or the select boards didn't try to make it available. It's just that it was not as easily accessible as it is now. And I think going forward, everybody needs to tune in because it is all there for everyone to see.
All right. Let's see. So we have Nicholas Ciantra. Nicholas, if you could state name and the town that you're from.
Hi, I'm Nick Ciantra. I'm in Mendon. I'm on the FinCom with Mike, who just spoke. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Yep. So I just have 2 points that I'd like to bring up. And one is I kind of a look back, and it was a discussion around last year and the thought process around bringing an override last year. And the point that I made at the time to both Jay and the superintendent is that many residents won't remember the dollar amount, but they will remember the fact that the schools came for an override 2 years in a row. And at the time I said, it was my advice at the time is to wait and go for one override versus 2 years in a row. And I think there is a bit of override fatigue from what I'm hearing. Secondly, I do have some concerns that I have expressed at FinCom meetings around the funding level from the selectmen in Mendon and not funding at the 50-50, which has been historically what we've done. So I think there are 2 things that, in my mind, and 2 things that are kind of resulted in the results of election is the 2 years in a row override and the total dollar amount. And it's really not a question, it's just kind of from what I'm hearing and that's the perspective that I'd like to share.
Thank you.
Looks like Coleman has his hand raised. I will allow him to talk as of now.
Yeah, hi, thank you again. Thank you for, I guess, sharing that the information from the school committee has been out there and is multiple years. I guess I would like to say is, you know, how does that information get transcended to the finance committee, then to the voters at large? Because I think that's where some of the disconnection is. Now, don't get me wrong, when it's 50% of your budget, I think we should be paying attention to all those meetings. I don't disagree. But, you know, as Mike Moroli and others have said, this new forum could be just that forum to bring those that time forward and get more eyes on it and what have you. But I think if we can get a multi-year funding strategy, if you will, or budget strategy from the town level as well, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
I think Mike Coleman can speak to this, obviously, probably in a lot more detail than I can. from the finance committee perspective, but realize every year on an annual basis before our budget hearing, and our budget hearing is usually the second week of March. It's usually around March 15th, give or take. But usually in the month of February, myself and the school committee, we go to, again, in non-COVID years, we go to Mendon Town Hall, or we go to the Upton Town Hall, or sometimes it's been at the fire department in Upton, and we give a full presentation to each community's finance committee before the school committee deliberates and certifies the budget here at Nipmuc in the auditorium. So they're very much public meetings that are posted in advance. And usually, and I can honestly say, and I give Mendon a lot of credit, and I give Mike and the entire FinCom a lot of credit. It is usually a pretty lengthy meeting in Mendon Town Hall because I am asked a ton of questions, really high quality, thoughtful questions by Mike and the FinCom.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. The first thing I'm going to just say to Coleman, this is, I'm not going to get down on my knees, but I am begging that you please offer your services to join the FinCom. You know, the voters did promote me to select board, so that's going to leave an opening, and we're already one down. So Coleman, I would ask you to please put in your, send an email to me or to the select board or to the FinCom. We'd love to have you on board, but to answer your question, just like the superintendent just said, not only do they have a hearing and do they come to town hall, we have a budget hearing also where we lay it all out and we answer questions, although not very many people show up and nobody really asks any questions. We ask all those questions because we realize we're supposed to be the eyes and ears of the voters. And I would invite you to look at the budget addendum or the FinCom book that is passed out at town meeting. And if you look at that, you'll see there is a historical format to that budget book. So it shows you what the current year budget is, what was actually requested and what the difference is between what all the departments requested and what we actually gave them. And then we go back in history, I think it's 3 or 4 years back. So you can see how the budget has evolved in the last few years, and that's available every year. But again, most people don't know, they don't look at it, they don't take the time, they don't know about it. And I just think this whole format of making it more available to people will really help us going forward. But again, we come back to the same question. The purpose of this meeting is to, where does the school committee go from here? Right. And but that's where we're at.
Yeah. On a side note, Mike, I did interview for the finance committee 8 years ago, and you were on the committee as well as Christopher. Well, let's just say I left frustrated. I would like to get more involved. I think the town does need better, I won't even say better reporting, but different reporting. I think they need not only 2 years in arrears, but 3 years forward. I'd like to see a 5-year budget. And I think, as I had mentioned, that the school committee has this information. And I think the townspeople, the directors of the town departments would as well. And I think
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let me just say very clearly, and I said this at the forum, and I've said this many times, the biggest driver of these increases is the funding formula that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts created. And as much as there are some people that definitely have that information, but it's at the State House on Beacon Hill. And I have tried personally speaking to 2 different state senators of ours and 2 different state reps at different times over the last 10 years. And there are parts of those formulas that were simply not revealed. They don't seem to want to let us know. But we know the percentages were going to go up. And that's what drives it. And it's very frustrating But, that's a discussion for another night, because it's really outside the purviews of the people who were at this meeting, unfortunately.
Okay. I think I'm done, but thank you very much. I do appreciate your information and the conversation back and forth. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from members of the community before we take a vote here?
I see no hands raised.
So seeing none,
That's a good question.
we're going to move on to the recertification of the budget. Individual motion for
Yes.
Make motions like we made them last time.
Did you want to be the official reader?
I'm happy to be the reader. I don't know if anybody has any other discussion they want, or they want things read in a different way. Which one are you going to read?
We all agree that we are making motions to recertify at the same amount, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Recertify the same amount. Okay. Motion one, I make a motion to set the operational budget for the Mendon-Upton Regional School District for the 2021-2022 fiscal year at $39,990,339. It consists of the general operations within the levy limit of $39,199,298 and debt service outside of the levy limit of $791,041. I'm just going to read them all. I make a motion to assess the town of Mendon $11,404,222 that consists of the following: minimum local contribution, $7,660,704. Non-discretionary charges, parentheses, transportation and fixed assets, $977,609. Discretionary charges, which is the operational additional, $2,380,804. Long-term debt, Clough Memorial School, $314,941. Long-term debt, Misco Green Repair, $70,164. We also make a motion to assess the town of Upton, $14,116,452 that consists of the following: minimum local contribution, $9,498,117. Non-discretionary charges, transportation and fixed assets, $1,226,199. Discretionary charges, operational additional, $2,986,201. Long-term debt, Clough / Memorial School, $326,809. Long-term debt, Misco Green Repair, $79,126. Motion to appropriate $13,616,357 from state aid that consists of the following: Chapter 70 funds, $12,511,846. Regional transportation reimbursement, $1,083,993. Charter school tuition reimbursement, $20,518. And to appropriate $853,309 from the following school district sources: Vision Sped contractual services, $75,000. Transfer in from revolving accounts, $150,000. Medicaid reimbursement, $25,000. Debt service bond premium, $3,309. E&D appropriation, $600,000.
We have a second.
Second.
Are we voting by roll call?
No need to. You're
All right.
live in person.
What concept? All in
Old
favor?
habits die hard.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Move move on. Any other matters not anticipated by the committee within 48 hours of the close of the meeting? And then future agenda items include the school committee reorganization on June 7th and updates from Senators Ryan Fatman and Michael Moore on June 21st.
That would be a great time to ask them about minimum local contribution and state funding for education.
Indeed. And regional school district transportation.
Yes,
Yes.
and special education and all the other places where the state has committed funding and has not delivered it.
Yes. All right, so with that, we are adjourned at 8:23 PM.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Second.
Now we're adjourned at 8:23.